Okay, so the question I'm going to be answering in this video is question 6. What have you learnt about technologies from the process of constructing this product? In terms of technology, we have learnt a great deal in this project, from both the prelim and in the final piece. Mainly through cameras. The first thing I learned through cameras was about the white balance. It's incredibly important to set the white balance before you actually shoot the film, like I did for this video, for example. You literally get a white piece of paper and adjust the settings so that the image doesn't look blue or orange, which really will affect your final piece if you want it to be a thriller. It is really important to remember that this must be set in every new location or lighting sequence. And as you can see here, we did this for the majority, we did this for every shoot in fact. Next is depth of field. This was a very clever technique to use if you want to confuse your audience or to disorientate them. This is done through manually changing the focus and then touching the area that needs to sharpen, so it goes from an image that's out of focus to one that's very clear that the audience can see. We did this in the beginning of the final piece, and as a result it looked a lot more effective because it makes the audience more aware because their eyes are adjusting. What should also be talked about with cameras is tripods. They're very important because we use two different forms of support in the final piece. In the film scene we used a Steadicam, which was a lot more effective because a tripod would have got extremely muddy on a wet day like that. But it also gave us a naturalistic style of... it made the camera look very naturalistic because it moves slightly with the body, which is good because it presents the idea that someone is following the main character. However, in the whole scene we used a normal tripod like this video is being filmed on. This was good because it creates a still very easy to look at image and is a lot easier to actually set up. Also, zooming when filming. We discovered that when in the actual film we zoomed the camera whilst it was recording, it looked very unprofessional and it looked tacky. We decided that in the end it should not be zoomed between shots whilst the camera's recording. It should be changed when the camera isn't recording, so then it's just a lot easier for the audience to see it in cuts or dissolves rather than you have to watch it zoom and it's just very boring to look at. Finally, with cameras is the actual model of the cameras themselves. We got given two cameras for when we filmed in the school and in the woods. The two different cameras produced two different frame sizes, which was annoying but workable. This meant that for the Turners Hill scenes, they produced lesser quality images because we had to manually make them bigger in post-production editing. However, this wouldn't have been a bigger issue because it was there would be a grayscale filter applied so it wouldn't be noticed. And but if I was going to do this project again, I'd make sure that we have two cameras if we were going to film in two different locations. That produces a different frame size, so there's continuity between the actual quality of the images. Okay, so moving on from cameras, we go into image editing, mainly continuity editing. This was a technique that we may have broke the rules on occasionally, but we did this for effect. On the whole, we did stick to the rules, so the 180-degree rules, eyeline match, graphic match, so on and so forth. But we decided that in events which was going to be disruptive, and we wanted the audience to question what they're seeing, it was okay to break the rules because it's something different. And this works well in a thriller piece because everything's chaotic. But on the times that we did keep to the rules, it allowed for continuity, so for the times where the audience have to take in information, it's a lot easier for them to do. We have to look at also the duration of shots and the pace of editing. For a thriller, it's relatively better for them to keep them short, so there's a lot more to look at in a quick chase scene. So just short, short, sharp, and snappy. But also, we've got to be conscious of the fact that if we have a scene where the audience needs to get vital exposition from the character, it's a lot better for the duration of the shots to be longer, so that the audience can successfully take in what they're doing. So in our final piece, we decided that we had to use both in moderation. So for the Turners Hill scenes, we kept the actual shots longer, so then the character gets to know, the audience gets to know more about the character, and it's a lot easier. But when it comes to the wood scenes, when it was obvious that something wasn't right, we made the shots quicker, so it was more exciting to the audience and it fit in with the conventions of a thriller film. Transitions in post-production editing. For an upbeat and thrilling sequence, you would expect for there to be only cuts only, because they're not noticeable to an audience. If you use something like a fade, wipe, or occasionally cross dissolve, but cross dissolve is normally okay, it looks like a PowerPoint presentation you do in year 3. It doesn't look professional. You want something that will be short and sharp. I can never say that right, but it is important because it makes it easier to look at. However, as I was talking about Turners Hill, when it has when it has longer durations, the actual cross dissolves are fine because you are linking each image in, and yes, it may be noticeable, but it's fluid and it's one motion, so that is acceptable. So overall, we learnt that it is acceptable for us to use cross dissolves in slower scenes, but if you want the action to really be conveyed, you've got to use cuts because they are so much easier. Okay, ellipsis. This is where the part of a story is withheld from the audience, so it creates enigma. We use this by having a clear cut between the two sequences, so it would go from the end of the Turners Hill scene, as in the first part of it, then it goes to the titles, and then it goes straight into the action in the woods scene. This is then effective because it allows the audience to question what is actually happening in the scene. I feel that we did this effectively because this is a clear convention that is used in thrillers. Moving on, colour filters in post-production editing. We wanted to make it clear to the audience that the character was in 2 separate locations, despite the fact that it's quite obviously clear because for one scene she's inside and for one she's outside. But also this is using different filters also shows that they are not filmed at the same time. We wanted to... we did this rather through Final Cut Pro, and for the hall we decided to use grayscale because it can show that this is almost like a dark place, somewhere where she doesn't want to be. This works effectively with the darker lighting, or low-key lighting rather. And it was very effective because when the sun went down, the two together worked brilliantly. For the actual wood scene, we used a filter that was very distorted. It looked like it was a dream sequence, which was good because it makes the audience question the narrative of what's happening. So using both, it was very effective because it was disorientating, but at the same time, it was clear where the character is, which is so much easier when it comes to following the narrative of the plot. Moving on from this, we have sound editing, and it was difficult when recording dialogue because we decided to have it as a voiceover that was diegetic off screen rather than recording the dialogue on location. This means that we could actually change it with post-production editing without having to go back and refilm sequences. This was effective because we wouldn't then have any noise interference from the rain in the woods or the echo in the hall. So overall that was effective in deciding to do that in post-production. We also used GarageBand. This was easier because we had Foley's recorded on set. So, for example, when the character walked through the leaves in the woods, we recorded that in live time because there would have been issues with lining up the sound with the visuals. Because as we learnt in our prelim, if GarageBand doesn't have an effective sounding one, it will not look natural and it will destroy the atmosphere that you're trying to create. Therefore, us actually recording it on location was so much easier. Soundtrack. We had a lot of issues trying to source the soundtrack. The ones that we actually wanted as a continuous song weren't necessarily available as royalty-free. Therefore, we used 2 different songs from the same royalty-free website. And this was a lot easier because it flowed more, especially when the music stopped between the 2 transitions, of the titling rather. Therefore, what we did was effective. And finally, we had titling. I learnt that titling was so important because you have to choose whether to superimpose the information or keep it entirely separate from the visuals. We decided to use both. For example, where it says 3 days later, it's a part of the scene, so the audience gets a sense of where they are, but they also have additional information, so it makes it a lot easier. However, for the really important information, so like the institutional information and the actual name of the title, we kept it separate so then the audience can easily absorb it without having to worry about looking at all the other information that is presented, like when it says 3 days later. This was effective because we're using both, so it's not noticeable, but the audience is still getting the information that they need to know. So that was the main thing. I feel that we have definitely developed using our technology, because before this course I didn't know anything about it. I really enjoyed using it, and we had to make a lot of difficult choices, but in the end we made the right decisions of doing what we did. I'm incredibly proud with our group using what we did, and yeah, so that's question 6.